In 1953, a machine saved American passenger rail from total collapse. Sleek, silver, profitable. For the first time in decades, trains could compete with cars and actually make money doing it. Within 10 years, these rail diesel cars were carrying millions of passengers across hundreds of routes that would have otherwise shut down completely. Then they vanished, not slowly, not gradually. By the mid-1980s, most were scrapped, the rest scattered to commuter agencies, museum pieces gathering dust. And here's what makes this interesting. They didn't fail. They worked exactly as designed. So, why did a machine that solved the passenger rail crisis disappear just 20 years after saving it? The answer isn't what you think, and it reveals something brutal about how quickly economic forces can flip a triumph into obsolescence. Let's go back to 1948. American railroads were facing annihilation on the passenger side. The problem wasn't demand, not yet. The problem was math. Running a passenger train required a crew of 5 to 7 people. Engineer, fireman, conductor, brakemen, baggage handlers. You needed a massive steam locomotive weighing over 400,000 pounds. You needed a separate baggage car. You needed station staff at every stop. And 4 lightly traveled branch lines connecting small towns. The operating costs were insane relative to ticket revenue. Here's the brutal reality. A typical branch line train in 1948 might carry 30 passengers on a 60-mile route. The locomotive alone burned through hundreds of gallons of water and tons of coal. The crew costs exceeded ticket sales by factors of 3 or 4. Railroad executives were watching money pour out with every departure. By 1950, American railroads were abandoning routes at an accelerating pace. Not because they wanted to, because they had no choice. The Interstate Commerce Commission received over 200 abandonment requests that year alone. Small towns across the Midwest, the Northeast, the South, communities that had depended on rail connections for mail, cargo, and human mobility, faced total isolation. Steam was dying. Diesel-electric locomotives were coming, but they didn't solve the fundamental problem. Passenger service on branch lines would never be profitable with the existing operational model. The industry needed something radically different. Or it needed permission to walk away entirely. Enter the Budd Company of Philadelphia, a manufacturer known for stainless steel passenger cars and innovative fabrication techniques. In 1949, Budd's engineering team made a radical proposal. What if you eliminated the locomotive entirely? What if the passenger car itself was the engine? The concept was called the rail diesel car, RDC for short, self-propelled, streamlined stainless steel unibody construction, 2 Detroit diesel 275 horsepower engines mounted underneath the floor. No separate locomotive, no baggage car needed, just one sleek 85-foot-long unit that could carry 90 passengers at speeds up to 85 miles per hour. The economics were revolutionary. An RDC could operate with a crew of just 2 people, engineer and conductor. It weighed 114,000 pounds, less than a third of a steam locomotive. Maintenance costs plummeted because the car used standard bus engines, not specialized railroad power plants. Fuel efficiency was exceptional. Diesel burned cleanly and cheaply compared to coal or oil. But here's what made it truly brilliant. Operational flexibility. You could run a single RDC on a branch line during low traffic periods, then couple multiple units together for higher demand. No locomotive switching, no complex consists. Just add cars or remove them as needed. The first RDC entered service in 1949 on the Reading Railroad between Philadelphia and Shamokin, Pennsylvania. The results were immediate. Operating costs dropped by 60% compared to conventional steam service. Passenger counts actually increased. People liked the modern, clean, fast trains. Budd had built a silver bullet, literally. Through the 1950s and into the 1960s, RDCs became the standard solution for struggling passenger routes across North America. The Boston and Maine Railroad bought nearly 100 units. The New York Central ran them throughout upstate New York. The Pennsylvania Railroad deployed them on branch lines across Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Canadian railroads, the Canadian Pacific and Canadian National, purchased over 200 units combined. Even overseas operators bought in. Australia, Brazil, Saudi Arabia. By 1956, Bud had sold nearly 400 RDCs. These cars were carrying millions of passengers annually on routes that would have been abandoned without them. And here's the thing, they worked. Reliability was exceptional. Many units logged over 2 million miles before major overhaul. The stainless steel bodies resisted corrosion. The diesel engines were proven commercial designs with parts available anywhere. Railroads that had been hemorrhaging money on passenger service were suddenly breaking even or even turning modest profits. Towns that would have lost rail access entirely kept their connections. Mail continued moving. Commuters could reach jobs in larger cities. The RDC wasn't romantic like a steam locomotive. It was something better. It was practical, efficient, profitable. For a brief moment in the 1950s, passenger rail had found a sustainable business model, but it was locked to a very specific economic moment, and that moment was already starting to shift. Here's where the story turns. The RDC was designed for an era of cheap labor and expensive machines. Its entire business case depended on that ratio. Yes, you still needed a two-person crew, engineer and conductor, but eliminating the separate locomotive, the fireman, the brakemen, and the baggage handlers created massive savings. Then the 1960s happened. Union contracts, strengthened through decades of negotiation, guaranteed rising wages for railroad workers. By 1970, an engineer and conductor together were earning over $40,000 annually in today's dollars. Substantial middle-class wages with full benefits, pensions, and strict work rules. Meanwhile, mass production drove bus costs into the ground. A modern highway bus in 1970 cost less than $100,000. It required one driver earning maybe $25,000 annually. It could carry 50 passengers on flexible routes that went directly to destinations. No fixed rails required. Do the math. 2 railroad workers at union wages versus 1 bus driver at standard wages. A $300,000 RDC that required track maintenance versus a $100,000 bus using publicly funded highways. The RDC's competitive advantage was evaporating, but it gets worse. Federal policy was actively tilting the playing field. Highway construction, funded by gas taxes and federal dollars, was exploding. The interstate highway system was connecting every major city in America with smooth, high-speed roads. Buses gained access to infrastructure that passenger trains could only dream about. And railroads, they had to maintain their own infrastructure. Every mile of track, every bridge, every signal system. Private capital maintaining private infrastructure while buses cruised on public roads. By 1970, the economic equation had completely reversed. What made sense in 1950, capital-intensive trains with small crews, was now hopelessly expensive compared to labor-light buses on government roads. The RDC didn't fail mechanically. It failed economically. The ground had shifted beneath it. Then came the coup de grace, deregulation. For decades, railroads had been trapped by Interstate Commerce Commission regulations. If you wanted to abandon a passenger route, you needed federal approval. The ICC could and did force railroads to maintain money-losing services for years. But by the 1970s, the railroad industry was collapsing. Penn Central, the largest railroad in America, went bankrupt in 1970. Other major carriers were teetering. The regulatory framework that had protected passenger service was crumbling. In 1970, Congress created Amtrak, effectively nationalizing intercity passenger rail. Most private railroads immediately handed over their passenger operations and walked away. The regulatory obligation was lifted. For branch line service, the Staggers Rail Act of 1980 made abandonment dramatically easier. Railroads could now exit unprofitable routes with minimal regulatory interference. Suddenly, the RDC's value proposition disappeared completely. Why optimize passenger rail economics when you could simply abandon the service entirely? Why invest in maintaining rail cars when buses could handle the traffic without the capital expense? The RDCs became orphans. Amtrak inherited some. Commuter agencies picked up others for short-distance urban runs. But the national network of branch line passenger service, the system the RDC was designed to save, was systematically dismantled. Permission to walk away had arrived, and the railroads sprinted for the exit. By 1985, most of the RDCs built in the 1950s were gone. Some were scrapped outright. The stainless steel had good salvage value. Others went to commuter operations in Boston, Philadelphia, and Toronto, where they ran for decades more on specific corridors. A handful ended up in museums or private preservation groups. But the national moment had passed. The machine that saved passenger rail in 1950 had become an artifact by 1980. Not because it failed, not because Americans stopped riding trains, but because the economic foundation it was built on, cheap labor, expensive machines, regulatory protection, had been completely inverted. Labor got more expensive, machines got cheaper. Deregulation arrived, and suddenly, a brilliant engineering solution was completely mismatched to reality. Here's what makes this story matter beyond railroad nostalgia. The RDC succeeded perfectly at its design mission. It cut costs, it saved routes, it worked. But success within a system is no guarantee of survival when the system itself transforms. We're watching this pattern repeat today. Electric vehicles designed for one regulatory environment. Transit systems optimized for commuting patterns that no longer exist. Infrastructure built for economic assumptions that have flipped. The sleek silver trains didn't vanish because they were bad machines. They vanished because the economic world they were built for moved on without them. So the next time someone proposes bringing back an old solution to a modern problem, ask this. Are we restoring what worked, or are we rebuilding something for an economy that no longer exists? The RDCs can't answer, but the scrapyards full of stainless steel definitely can.